Peter was born with the dominant X gene. This theory basically reframes everything people thought they knew about how Peter got his powers in the first place. Instead of the radioactive spider bite being the sole source of his abilities, the idea is that it simply woke up something that was already sitting dormant inside him. Throughout Brand New Day, Peter's arachnid DNA suddenly spikes years after his original bite, causing organic webbing, intensified senses, a painful physical transformation that the film treats almost like a second awakening rather than a brand new event. Tom Holland has even referred to it as spider puberty in interviews, which fits surprisingly well with how mutant powers typically work in the comics, often triggered later in life by stress or trauma rather than existing fully formed from day one. And this movie happens to introduce Jean Grey at the exact same time, whose own powers activated early because of a traumatic event in her childhood. That parallel feels far too specific to ignore. Peter even builds an inhibitor originally meant to suppress his own evolving DNA, and it works just fine on Jean too, which suggests their biology might be operating on some of the same rules. Add in that Damage Control's leader in this movie is based on a comic villain known specifically for hunting mutants, and Peter's slow, painful transformation starts looking less like an isolated superhero glitch and more like the film quietly setting him up as one of Earth 616's earliest native mutants, right as the X-Men are about to become a much bigger part of this universe. Peter's mutation is a subtle hint at the symbiote. Through the whole movie, Peter's dealing with this strange physical evolution that nobody fully explains. He's got organic webbing suddenly, his eyes go pitch black at certain points, his senses spike, and he starts getting way more aggressive than the Peter fans are used to seeing. On the surface, the movie treats it like some kind of natural mutation tied to a spider biology. But if you go back to No Way Home, there's a tiny detail that a lot of people forget. When Eddie Brock and Venom get zapped back to their own universe, a small piece of the symbiote actually gets left behind in the MCU. It literally crawls off into the shadows of that bar with nobody chasing it down. That means there's been a loose symbiote fragment wandering around New York this entire time, with nothing stopping it from eventually finding its way to Peter. So instead of a random mutation, this could be that leftover piece of Venom slowly bonding with him, explaining the black eyes, the aggression, and the sudden appearance of organic webbing that functions completely differently from his mechanical shooters. And here's the part that really sells it for me. When Frank shoots Peter near the end of the film, it's presented as nearly fatal. He flatlines for a bit, the Fitty holds a vigil for him, and then he somehow pulls through it without much medical explanation. In the comics, there's actual precedent for the symbiote saving a dying host by literally healing the wound from the inside. So it's very possible that same organism is what kept Peter alive after that gunshot, quietly protecting its host while everyone assumes it's just Jean using her telepathy to hold them together. By the way, if you guys like movie content like this, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks. Anyways, the Hulk remembers who Peter Parker is. During Peter's massive fight with Hulk in this film, Bruce clearly doesn't recognize him at all, treating him like a total stranger despite everything they went through together as Avengers. But the Hulk side of things tells a very different story. When Jean tries to take control of Bruce's mind and use him against Peter, Hulk actively fights her off and forces her out, showing that he operates as his own separate consciousness, completely independent from Bruce's memories. That distinction matters a lot here. Peter tries everything to stop him during the fight. Weapons don't work, inhibitor can't get through his skin, and eventually Peter just gives up trying to win physically. Instead, he calls out to him as Bruce says his own name out loud and appeals to whatever's left of their friendship. Right after that, Hulk's entire demeanor shifts. He stops attacking, stares at his own reflection, and just walks away instead of finishing what he started. That change happens immediately after Peter identifies himself by name, which lines up with the idea that saying his name is what actually breaks through. This mirrors a comic storyline where Hulk flat out tells Peter that Bruce forgot who he is, but Hulk himself never did. So even though Stranger's spell managed to wipe Peter from Bruce's conscious memory, there's a real chance that never touched whatever the Hulk holds on to separately, meaning somewhere underneath all that rage he still knew exactly who he was fighting. Damage Control will evolve into the Mutant Control Department. Looking back across the home trilogy, this organization has been slowly expanded in a way that lines up perfectly with this theory. It started off small, seizing leftover alien weapons from tombs after the first film. Then in No Way Home, they arrested Peter and confiscated Stark's drone technology, which later shows up being used against Kamala Khan in Miss Marvel. By Wonder Man, they're running secret prisons and treating enhanced individuals as either threats to contain or assets to exploit. And now in Brand New Day, they've gone even further, actively kidnapping and experimenting on two young mutants, Jean and her sister Sarah, trying to study and weaponize their telepathy. That's a massive leap from cleaning up battle wreckage to running unauthorized experiments on children with powers. On top of that, the man running the show this time, Bill Mesker, is straight up pulled from the comic, where he's known as a prominent anti-mutant extremist who led an entire militia dedicated to spreading fear about mutants, giving that character control over a fully funded federal agency with drones, prisons, informants, and now genetic suppression technology feels like a very deliberate setup. It really does seem like damage control isn't just going to keep operating the way it has been, it's positioned to shift its entire mission specifically toward controlling and containing mutants as they start becoming public knowledge across this universe. The next three theories are all based on the post-credit scene, and I think this scene can be foreshadowing one of three possible scenarios. The first scenario, and the one I think is most likely, is that the Spidey tracker is tracking Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man as he is being saved from his dying universe. Right after the credits roll, Ned's app goes from showing a normal ping in New York to completely losing its mind, zooming out past the city, past the planet, past the moon, until it locks onto a second Spider-Man somewhere out in open space. Now here's where it gets fun. Tobey's version of Peter Parker was last seen heading back to his own universe at the end of No Way Home, alive, older, and still very much active as Spider-Man. If his reality got caught up in the incursions that are apparently tearing the multiverse apart before Doomsday and Secret Wars, that would explain why he's suddenly untethered and floating through space instead of chilling in his own timeline. And this is where the second layer comes in. The Fantastic Four already have a ship confirmed across dimensions, shown right there in the Thunderbolts post-credit scene, complete with the big blue 4 symbol and Reed Richards technology behind it. So the idea is that Hobie's Peter didn't just get yanked out of his collapsing universe randomly. Reed Richards, or someone connected to him, might have scooped him up before everything went bad, and now he's riding along on that extra-dimensional ship heading toward Earth 616. It lines up almost perfectly with the old Secret Wars comic where Reed builds a life raft to save select heroes right before their universe gets wiped out, and Spider-Man happens to be one of the passengers. So there's a real chance Ned's tracker isn't glitching. Number reason, it might be catching Tobey's Spider-Man mid-rescue, floating through the void on his way back into the story. The next possible scenario is that the Spidey tracker is showing Peter being transferred to Battleworld or to the Fantastic Four ship. There's another layer worth exploring beyond just who the tracker is finding. It's also about where Peter himself might be heading. Throughout the movie, Ned repeatedly explains that he built this app because he genuinely wants to thank Spider-Man for saving him, and Peter's fully aware the tracker exists. So by the end of the movie, after Peter and Ned start rebuilding that fractured connection through the handshake, it would make a lot of sense for Peter to intentionally let that final signal ping through space, almost like a quiet way of telling Ned he's still out there and still alive. Given everything happening with the Fantastic Four's confirmed dimension-crossing ship and the direction the franchise is heading with Doomsday and Secret Wars right around the corner, Peter vanishing off-world isn't some random accident. It lines up with the old comic storyline mentioned in the previous theory. So instead of the tracker just randomly malfunctioning, this scene could be showing Peter either riding along on that Fantastic Four ship or already on his way toward Battleworld itself, using the one piece of technology built specifically to find him as a way of letting his best friend know he hasn't disappeared for good. The last option, and the one I think is the most unlikely, is that the Spidey tracker is tracking Miles Morales. Instead of thinking about this scene as just tracking a second version of Peter, there's a strong case that it's picking up an entirely different Spider-Man altogether. When the app zooms out and finds that second signal in space, the screen doesn't just glitch normally. It pixelates, it tears apart, and the colors shift and separate in a very specific way that looks almost identical to the visual style used in Sony's animated Spider-Verse movies. That kind of distortion has become a signature for dimension-hopping spider people in that universe, where crossing realities causes visible fractures in the image itself, and Miles is the character most directly tied to that whole concept of multiple people wearing the mask across different realities. On top of that, Marvel has already planted the seeds for Miles inside live-action continuity. Donald Glover's character in Homecoming straight up mentions having a nephew, and that detail has been confirmed by the people behind the scenes as an intentional nod toward Miles existing somewhere in this world, with Kevin Feige recently talking about definite plans for a live-action Miles down the road, and Tom Holland openly saying he'd love to help pass the torch someday. That glitching visual right before the credits promise Spider-Man will return starts to feel like more than just a coincidence. It reads like the tracker briefly catching a completely different Spider-Man from somewhere else entirely. All of these theories are super compelling and make the future of Spidey in MCU extremely exciting. Anyways, let's move on to the next theory. Ned was able to remember him and Peter's handshake because he has inherent magic abilities. Ned's always had this weird little connection to magic that the movies never fully explain. Back in No Way Home, he mentions his grandmother believing magic runs in their family, and then he actually manages to open portals using a sling ring despite him zero training. Those portals aren't random either. They specifically specifically locate different versions of Peter Parker, which says a lot about how his magic responds to that particular bond. So when Ned completes that entire secret handshake on instinct alone, without any conscious memory of Peter, it lines up with someone whose magical sensitivity let some of that erased friendship physically slip through anyway. His hands remember before his mind does. Now, there's also a much simpler explanation running right alongside that one, and honestly, it fits just as well. Ned spends his whole movie investigating Spider-Man's identity through his tracker app, and he actually meets Peter at a party earlier on, where Peter introduces himself using a fake name. Later, MJ accidentally slips and calls Spider-Man Peter right in front of Ned. So by the time Peter shows up at the end and drops the fake name, reintroducing himself as Peter, Ned's already got enough pieces on the table to connect it himself. He might not remember their years of friendship at all. He might just be sharp enough to realize the guy from the party, the name MJ let slip, and the person standing in front of him are all the same person. Either way, if it's a satisfying moment, whether it's magic pulling old memories back or Ned simply being clever enough to solve it on his own. Jean Grey is headed towards upstate New York, or what will become Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. At the very end of the film, after everything with her sister Sarah and Bill Metzger falls apart, Jean gets on a bus and leaves the city behind. The destination isn't shown clearly, but the road she's traveling is surrounded by thick trees instead of city buildings, which points toward the classic update New York setting that's always been tied to Troll's Xavier's mansion in the comics. She's got nothing left pulling her back into the city. Her parents already abandoned her because of her powers, her sister is gone, and she spent this entire movie being hunted by a government agency that wants to study and exploit mutants. So heading toward a secluded wooded area outside the city actually makes a lot of sense for someone trying to disappear and start over. And here's the fun part. Jean is one of the very first X-Men members ever introduced in the comics, right alongside Cyclops, Beast, Iceman, and Angel, all trained personally by Xavier. If Sadie Singh's version of Jean is the one arriving at this location before any formal school exists, that opens up a pretty wild possibility where she isn't just a student who eventually joins the X-Men, but someone who's present at the actual beginning of it. She could be the spark that convinces Xavier a safe haven for mutants needs to exist in the first place, especially with what she's just witnessed from Damage Control. That would flip the usual formation story on its head and make Jean part of building the foundation instead of just walking into it later. Jean fractured MJ's memory block, which allowed her to remember Peter. This one connects nicely with a theory that I will get to later, but it's got its own specific evidence. Jean actually goes into MJ's mind directly during the film. She takes control of her body, flicks around inside her memories, and even tells Peter flat out that there's no trace of him left in there. So right away, the movie is showing us Jean poking around inside a place that's supposed to be sealed off. Later, during Jean's massive citywide psychic outburst after learning about her sister, MJ gets caught inside that wave of energy along with everyone else in range. But unlike the other frozen civilian standing there blank-faced, MJ has a tear roll down her cheek. That's a strange detail to include if nothing's actually happening beneath the surface. It suggests that this second, much bigger blast of psychic energy did something the first quiet visit into her mind didn't. From that point forward, MJ starts acting differently around Peter. She lets him into her apartment. She draws him without the mask on. She visits him in the hospital and leaves that drawing by his bed. None of that fits someone who's still fully in the dark. It fits someone whose memories are slowly leaking back through, thanks to Jean accidentally kicking a hole in whatever stranger spell put up in the first place. Yelena knows who Peter is. This one flies under the radar a bit, but once you notice it, it's hard to ignore. When Peter goes to Yelena for help, she makes him strip down to basically nothing before letting him anywhere near her, except she lets him keep the mask on. That detail alone makes the whole scene feel intentional. Peter's mask in this movie is noticeably thinner than his older Stark-designed ones, thin enough that his actual eyes and the shape of his face visible underneath the fabric if you look closely. Yelena spends that entire conversation sitting close to him, clearly studying him, and comments on how he refuses to take the mask off even after exposing everything else. Given her background as a former Black Widow trained specifically to read people and gather intelligence, it's not much of a stretch to think she's picking up on more than Peter realizes. And it's not just her training that makes this plausible. Peter in the film, Peter asked her to dig up information on Jean Grey, information that Damage Control had deliberately scrubbed from public records, and Yelena manages to find it anyway. That tells you she's got access to resources capable of uncovering things that are supposedly erased. Considering Peter's identity was broadcast to the entire world before Stranger's spell wiped everyone's memory, there would have been mountains of footage, photos, and government files with his face attached to Spider-Man. If anyone in this universe had the connections and the skill to quietly match those old records to the man sitting across from her in that bathhouse, it's Yelena. She just might be choosing to keep that knowledge to herself for now. Doctor Stranger's spell is actually a psychological block that can be broken by deep personal connection or familiar triggers. triggers. This one's all over the movie once you start paying attention. The spell was supposed to make the entire world forget Peter Parker ever existed, but it clearly didn't erase everything tied to him. MJ and Ned still remember Spider-Man rescuing them. They just can't connect that hero to Peter specifically. That's a strange kind of memory loss if you think about it. It's not full erasure, it's more like a targeted block sitting right in front of one specific piece of information, and the movie keeps poking at that block throughout the runtime. MJ holds onto that broken necklace Peter gave her for years, even though she has no conscious memory of their relationship. She keeps Peter's letter. She tears up during Jean's massive telepathic outbursts, even though she has no idea why. None of that fits with someone who's truly forgotten a person. It fits with someone whose memories are still there, just locked behind something that can crack under enough emotional pressure. Then you've got Ned's ending, which honestly is the strongest piece of evidence in the whole film. Peter starts their old secret handshake, and Ned's hands just fake over. He completes the entire sequence on muscle memory alone, and only after finishing it does he actually say Peter's name out loud. That's not coincidence. That's a locked door getting knocked open by something familiar enough to slip past the spell. It really does seem like Stranger's magic didn't destroy these people's memories of Peter, it just buried them, and certain triggers are strong enough to dig them back up. If you enjoyed this, I post movie content a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.